So this is 20:34 hours GMT, just short of few seconds, on Saturday, the 5th of September 2020. Now, there may be a sequential kind of chaos or inconsistency about parts of this diagnosis being B, C, and D. This one is marked D. So we have to check once the recordings are done to see which ones are which, whether there has been a 3 that is C or there has been a mistake. That is the sequencing of the editions. So this is the diagnosis of the Fleet Street media of Saturday, 5th of September 2020. Now, one point about the Fleet Street newspapers. I have been based mainly in Whitechapel for all this time, essentially having to travel to central London, especially Charing Cross and Fleet Street as well. Fleet Street used to have late night news agents that used to sell the early editions of the following day. So I would travel to Fleet Street or Charing Cross and collect the following day's newspapers. So that stopped when I moved reluctantly from the area in Whitechapel, that is New Road. And why and how I moved from New Road is integrally linked with my campaign and the corrupt, racist, and antisocial agenda of the so-called Royal London Hospital crooks that control the agenda. And because the Royal London Hospital crooks property wing owned the freehold of the property that I was in New Road. And the history of how the Royal London Hospital crooks dealt with complaints about disrepair is the textbook classic example of imperialism, criminality, and racism combined. And it is there that we shall go when we do a series on the role of the Royal London Hospital crooks controlling the properties in the Stepney area and how they attacked the housing rights, the community rights of people who were living in properties for decades. Many of the properties the people were living in changed hands, and the Royal London Hospital or the London Hospital bought up the freehold of many of the properties in New Road and in other areas, other streets in nearby areas. And the way the Royal London Hospital or the London Hospital property criminals behaved showed total contempt to the idea of the community and total ignorance of the idea of a community campaign and campaign organizer such as myself. And the damage they have done and the damage they contributed to doing cannot be matched by 100 Royal London Hospital properties portfolios. And that is what I meant by the combined known wealth of Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk and Bill Gates. Because what I have been doing and what I've been involved in doing intellectually and organizationally and in campaigning terms on the streets have been affecting and have been destined to affect positively the benefits of humanity, not just in London, not just in the UK, but across the world. And that takes the narrative just as a referential point to the broadcast I made about 3 or 4 minutes long on the Channel 4 News slot in January 1992, telling the United Nations at the time and the President of the United Nations Assembly of that particular year, which was in the person of John Major. Major was on his way to New York to address the General Assembly and attend the General Assembly, and his kind of propaganda line in the run-up to that journey was about nuclear weapons. Now, I am absolutely opposed to nuclear weapons, but in terms of practicality, the immediate political and social, environmental threats posed by the poverty and hunger and famine in Africa and Asia, these threats are far bigger. And as can be seen in the current Boris Johnson-fronted regime in Britain, capitalizing on the emotional instability of the gullible, brainwashed majority of the Little Englanders, that the entire continent of Africa and the entire continent of Asia is about to descend on Britain. Now, that kind of insane, scary kind of scenario is being created by the racists who feed off the fear of ordinary brainwashed people that their country, their neighborhood, is about to be taken over by hordes of Africans and Asians. Now, of course, that is all absolute lies based on lies, but those lying bases do not deter the gullibles from believing in the lies as if the lies were the truth. So every day for decades, I traveled to Charing Cross almost in the day when it was possible, if there were no other commitments. But evening was less crowded with commitments, so I would travel mainly by number 15 bus from Commercial Road to Charing Cross station, and the news agents, W.H. Smith, or the street agents, news agents, and I'd pick up the papers, and especially in the evenings, I'd pick up the following day's Fleet Street papers that were available already in the news agents, early editions. And sometimes I would collect the same from the news agents sat in Fleet Street and opposite the side road that had the office of the Daily Mail before, and approximately opposite the St. Bride's Church, the Fleet Street Church. So, and parallel to, alongside, not a few doors away from the Peterborough Street or Peterborough building that had the Daily Borisgraph for many years. So Peterborough column is there. So what is the point of all this talk about traveling from Commercial Road to the central London to pick up the newspapers? The point is the Tower Hamlets, Newham, Hackney, and most of East London are intellectually very poorly served. And the circulation of newspapers in those areas has been very poor. And I must have been, because of that, I must have been, and I probably still am, the only person who buys so many newspapers, which takes this commentary straight to what happened in July, August 2012. July, August 2012, one of the places that I was forced to store years of collections of newspapers was attacked by a gang of racists at the instigation of a gang of Bangladeshi criminals. And the target was to destroy these stored archives and collections of magazines and newspapers. Now, that particular attack was not the first time and not the only place that these items were attacked. But the point being made is the reason why I had to buy and store all these newspapers was because there was no other place, there still isn't any place anywhere in East London outside of the British Library that has so many news magazines and publications. Now, why do I buy them? Precisely because the point of reference, not that they are telling the truth, but they are the only consistently available sources, material sources of evidence of the role and the contents of what they're doing. So it's not me being deluded into believing that the newspapers contain some kind of miracle. Most certainly not. The opposite is the case. And that is what I had been collecting. Like today's papers, I couldn't find the Times of today. I have traveled across all of Commercial Road, and there is no place where the Times is available. One place that normally has a copy of the Times doesn't have any papers delivered to it today. And the outlet, the Sainsbury's outlet near Limehouse that has the Times, I thought that I would be able to find it in the other shops, and I couldn't find it. Did have the Times, and I didn't buy it because I thought I'd travel a bit further and buy that with other items that I had to buy from the other outlets. So the daily newspapers have, in this year's pricing or current prices, cost around £20, 17 to £20, depending on whether they're all available or not. 17 to £20 a day. And they don't contain any news. The purpose of my buying the newspapers and diagnosing the contents is precisely to expose the emptiness of the papers. And that is what I have been doing, one of the things I've been doing for a very, very long time. And I have not bought these papers over decades with money from any public source or sources. The only time I have paid for these papers has been from one or two other persons. Now, those have not been consistent, and none of those sources has been owed anything, because what they contributed to the buying of the papers has been outmatched, outweighed a million times by the benefit that they derived from my work and from associations with me. So if it is £20 a day, and somebody paid for £20 a day for £100, £130, £140 a week, then that person was getting the benefit equivalent of one day's fees demanded by David Pennick, which is £20,000. Now, there is no way that £20,000 and £140 is the same. So I'm just giving an example. The work the quality and the content and the uniqueness of the work that I have been doing has been of that kind of standard, and it is. And so, therefore, what I'm doing here is not available anywhere, and it is not be available in the archives of the audio broadcast from America by Alistair Cook. Alistair Cook's letter from America are not that empirical, not that direct, and that not that candid or real life or real time. Alistair Cook was a poisonous broadcaster. He confected a lot of poisonous manipulated lanes and routes and lines and presented them in a leisurely way over about 10-15 minutes. That's the only one that can be referred to as a consistent point of reference, similar like a broadcast from another country or another continent. What I'm doing is introducing something on the screen which is new, but I have been doing off screen and in print. I've been doing the same for a very long time now. The fact that I have to travel to central London to even find an ordinary newspaper shows that in the ordinary outlets, newsagents so called, across East London, Commercial Road up to Kennington and whatever, there is no demand, not enough demand from the ordinary customers for these materials, these newspapers. It's not my imagining. It is the fact of the volume of stock or no stock of newspapers in those shops that tells the story, tells volumes. And that shows that there is, in terms of literary capability or interest or kind of standard, that is very low, very poor across East London. So that's the poverty that has been on for decades. And it is not based on any particular ethnic or racial group. Most people, even now, across Newham, across Tower Hamlets, across Hackney, most people, residents, on the whole, most people, or the majority, are still white people, European people, and the assumption, general assumption is that the Europeans are more literate than the Asians or Africans. And again, on the basis of the consumption, that is on the demand for newspapers, it is clear that that literacy rate is not very pronounced anywhere in the east of London or east end of London. Now extrapolate this across London and it is not very different. So there are small numbers of people who obtain or collect or have their papers delivered at home or at their addresses. I mean, back in the country I come from, I used to have the newspapers delivered in the morning at my door, through my door. But that is one of the unreal comparisons, because migrants or immigrants or foreigners, whatever category I may fit in the perception of the brainwashed, are not perceived to be of higher literary tradition or history. And to some of the people who are from the African backgrounds and come from the Caribbean, the idea of Asians is very low. The standing in their eyes of Asians is based on what they saw or heard about the sugarcane and the colonial importation of the plantation people from parts of the subcontinent. Now, these people from the Caribbean, the African origin Caribbean people, actually wrongly think that most of the Asian people are of the same background or stock. Now, how wrong can they be? They have no idea, they have no scale, and they have no understanding or depth about the subcontinent. And all of this is part of the input that I'm producing for the whole of humanity, wherever they access this. When Morarji Desai was the Prime Minister of India in the 70s, he came to London, as did then Bangladesh President Ziaur Rahman. And they all came to London as part of the Commonwealth Heads of Government Jamboree. And my getting an access to the proceedings, to the events, took me the previous 1 month of battle. And I had to battle all the way in order to get a simple accreditation. Now, that was something I took for granted in the 60s when I was in then East Pakistan and doing the work of a journalist. I was not making money because my work was done without asking for any money or receiving any money or needing any money from any of those people who control the platforms that I wrote in. And the condition was that I wrote what I thought was right and correct and just. I didn't write based on the editors or the owners' dictate. I never did. And they never actually could argue with me. So when I would write a piece, I would do my research. And in the 1960s, there was no internet. There was no even fax. And the access to the comparable resource of a library, like the Collingwood Library, newspaper library of the British Library, didn't exist. And so therefore the research was very much on foot. And the research was limited to the physical ability to reach whatever source or sources. So I have traveled a long, long time and long distance in pursuit of the evidence that has been driving me absolutely throughout these decades. And the difference between the on-foot research undertakings and journeys and trips that I had to take in Dhaka and the comparable kind of trips online and otherwise I've been having to take in the UK. The difference is in physical kind of access and limitation. It doesn't actually constitute any difference in terms of the ethics, the morality, and the principle. And what I'm saying is that I created, over the decades, I created a new source, a new standard, a new frame of reference that was not existing or in existence before and doesn't exist anywhere else. So this broadcast and this record must be treated as part of what I have created and what I am applying and sharing for the greater understanding of humanity and people who are interested in seeking the truth and looking at the truth and serving the cause of the truth. So when I say that the communist morning star, which I called star, the star is called the morning star. I call it deliberately because the morning star distorts most items of news that affect the majority of large numbers of people. And the morning star like reverses the whole world into its own narrow, very narrow view. And that view is contaminated by the fact that it is not a genuine communist newspaper, nor is the Soviet Union in existence anymore to which it was aligned, nor are the people in the editorial decision-making process and posts and positions sufficiently read let alone enlightened about events in the world. So there is no real kind of supply of truth related, fact related, evidence based, comprehensive array of materials day to day. So when I have to take a look at the papers and look at the media, I have to take a look beyond what is available. And it is not just the task that is equivalent to the full-time task of about one person. It is more than 10 persons' tasks. So when I look at the BBC's so-called newspaper preview or review and its equivalent on Sky News, I am astounded by the fact that nobody has stopped these outlets publishing these packaged lies, because they don't actually examine the evidence. They don't examine society. They don't examine the law. They don't examine the duties of the state. They don't examine the state of the people in the state or states of the people in the state. So all the newspapers, Fleet Street, in other words, are devoid of connection with real life, real people, real lives people, as is the Morning Star, because the Morning Star considers itself as and it boasts itself as being the only English language daily in the whole world of the left. English language daily of the left. Now, in the 1980s, I devised a formula and I was writing a thesis called Left Out of the Media. And its abbreviation was LOOM, LOOM. And I came up with Left Out of the Media because after having examined the contents of the so-called left outlets, including the Fabian's New Statesman and Society, which became a fascist organ, it is completely devoid of any connection with ordinary social concepts. I did that because there was no presence in the mainstream media, the presence of so-called left. Now that was in the beginning of the 1980s, and I'll tell you why it was necessary. Because the then Greater London Council had just got elected under the leadership of Andrew Mackintosh, the Labour Party man from Haringey. Andrew Mackintosh had led the Labour Party into victory against the Conservatives. Conservatives at that 1981 GLC election had been led by Horace Cutler. Now, Cutler was a typical, very ignorant and sub-intelligent conservative. And Andrew Mackintosh was the opposite. He was quite well-read and enlightened. But his defect, as was claimed by his enemies who ousted him in a coup within days of the election, the coup led by Ken Lying Still Livingstone, they said that he was not socialist enough and he was not reliable enough and all the other things. Now, we, of course, can only speculate as to what an Andrew Mackintosh-led GLC would have done up to 1986 or 87, because after he was ousted, he became deactivated politically. Now, Ken Livingstone, whom I call Ken Lying Still Livingstone, was the main poison behind the ouster of Andrew Mackintosh. And the idea that the Ken Livingstone fronted GLC floated was that they were going to, one of the ideas was that they were going to create a new media and so on. They never did, they never could, because in order to replace the lying media, the replacer had to be telling the truth or even familiar with the truth. Now, Ken Livingstone, Lying Still Livingstone, was not even familiar with the truth. He never was. And his cabal included John MacDonnell, who served as the shadow finance minister under Jeremy Corbyn. These people constituted a cabal of sub-intelligent, sub-informed, sub-educated pretenders to the platform of the left, and they overhyped themselves as the most revolutionary left council in all of England, and they made a complete mess. Now, I had to undertake about 4-year-long battle to destabilize most of their claims, and the details are already in print, but I will update in due course in later editions. Essentially, what I did every week, the GLC set, was to attend any stunt parade organized for the promotion of Ken Livingstone and directly, openly, vocally challenge the contents of what he was saying. So I did that for several years. The result included Livingstone hiring about 5 or 6 security persons to stop me. Now, you don't need 5 or 6 security persons to stop one person speaking. But that's what the Ken Livingstone did. Every time I tried to use my pass, because I had a pass to enter the GLC, because I was an active member of the Inner London Education Authority committees. And I had to attend those committees, nothing to do with the GLC, but those committees. And so therefore he couldn't legally stop me. So he created a lot of diversions by these racists and thugs in order to delay me or kind of derail me from entering the county hall. So these are the battles that have been kind of ongoing, and I have been waging the battle against the liars. And so therefore my diagnosis of the media is part and parcel of the battle against the lies and liars. And today's Times I could not get hold of, as I said, and the Sun I almost nearly missed. I had the other ones, and I showed you in the earlier edition of the front pages of those ones. Now this is the Sun of today, Saturday, the 5th of September 2020. Now it's like the news of the screws, as the private lie calls Rupert Murdoch's News of the World. That's the front page. Now, nobody would believe that that is the front page of a newspaper in a country which is still in the middle of the pandemic. So that is the front page. And it is about a footballer, happens to be an African origin person, who has apparently told his soccer aid pals he would hire 19 call girls. Why would a footballer hire 19 prostitutes? I mean, and what is this all about? This is not about health. This is not about society. This is most certainly not about Boris Johnson's lies that are still costing lives. And there is pages 4 and 5 says that airline staff have got a dossier on the stars, again about sleaze and sex and whatever, pornography and whatever. And then on pages 6 and 7, this guy again, and that is what the Sun is running. These are the important pages of a paper which is still apparently read by more than 1 million people. But the Sun doesn't apologize for showing the almost naked front of this so-called judge of the BGT, Britain Got Talent's banjo. I mean, she has got almost no clothes on. So what's the difference? The difference is that it is completely, absolutely using any excuse to peddle the thing that the sun has peddled, the flesh or the image of women. And the Murdoch dirty digger made billions by the sun before he took over the world and became the owner of Fox News, etc. in the USA. The main money the dirty digger made through the sun. And sun was like the most explosive pornographic kind of daily meal that the gullibles in the millions bought, and there were other side kind of issues and businesses, and gave Murdoch the billions over decades. And all of this took place in the essential facts in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, literally hundreds of yards from where I existed in New Road. Just down the road, Cannon Street Road, and you go into Wapping Bays, where Murdoch's dirty empire was doing the dirty business and cleaning up the pockets of the gullibles and collecting billions. And there is no alternative to the scum, even now, to Murdoch, who is now running already a Times kind of radio and is threatening to set up another sub-pornographic right-wing fascist television channel or outlet or network or platform. And so therefore there is no morality, there is no ethics, and there is complete corruption and lies and inventions. And they're now using this American style kind of image of Boris Johnson and a completely fabricated claim by him. Your country needs you. And the civil servants, so-called, are being asked to go back to work from the offices and leave the remote working locations. Now, in the papers, there is no mention of the existence of the Labour Party as opposition, as there was none. When Starmer wasn't the leader, it was Corbyn. And those bots and other brainwashed morons who fabricate and exaggerate Jeremy Corbyn's image as a socialist leader, they need to read up and check the facts. Corbyn never made any waves, never made any actual intervention for democracy, for accountability, and most certainly not against racism. So the fantasies and brainwashed morons who are still clinging on to the lie that Corbyn was the socialist leader the country missed the opportunity to be led by, should actually go and check up the actual record. And what I'm saying here is the newspapers are empty of any substance from the Keir Starmer so-called frontage, as it was during Corbyn. And we shall be coming back to this issue and these topics and narratives in the later editions. This point, I would like to just mention, like a trail, that the issue of Muslims being devout Muslims, being followers of the Prophet, peace be on him, is demanding to be repeatedly taken through to the next stage or stages of the broadcast, because the Muslims claim to be devout followers of the Prophet, or those Muslims who do claim to be devout followers of the Prophet of Islam, they don't show their kind of character of generosity, solidarity, and compassion to other human beings. They are very good at churning out slogans and chanting various equivalents of the Hindus' mantras in praise of the Prophet. But when it comes to looking at the state of the other Muslims in poverty, in starvation, in hunger, the Muslims don't behave like Muslims. They behave like they don't even exist. And this extends to all the neighbors, most of the neighbors, and especially to the treatment of animals. Muslims, in their behavior, as observed, treat animals with contempt. Nothing to do with the ritual slaughter, because that, if done properly, then there is a possibility of being tolerated. I'm talking about beyond slaughter, before slaughter, and without any slaughter. Ordinary lives of animals are treated with contempt by Muslims generally. And I'm saying that after having, at various points, serious need to consult Muslims, scholars, sources of knowledge about the state of animal care and welfare, I have found that there is nothing, there is no source. The most extensive entries online about, say, to take the example of a very kind of easy to access and understand topic, the Muslims' attitude to cats. The most extensive number, the biggest number of entries are about how wonderful the Prophet was in his attitude to cats, and how Muslims in various countries and various times have been very kind to cats. That is not what is needed. What is needed by live cats and other animals is what the Muslims are doing today at the time to help the animals. And the internet is totally empty. If anyone knows otherwise and can prove me wrong factually, I would more than welcome a correction or a communication to correct my statement. Otherwise, I would assert that there is nothing the Muslims have created to help the humanity, help the other Muslims, and most certainly not to help the cats or other animals. So going absolutely melodically, lyrically, kind of over the top about how the Prophet was wonderfully kind of disposed to the cat is not what the cats need. The cats need kindness, real care, real understanding, and the Muslim families, the Muslim children, to be brought up and to be educated in an environment with enough information that lasts lifetimes to respect cats and animals, and to respect the cats not just if the cat is in their home as a pet, but outside in the wild, in the environment, on the planet. And that actually is including the fact that the Muslims don't do much to help the environment. Again, if anyone has evidence that substantially kind of shows me to have not got the current facts right, is more than welcome to contact me and correct me. But otherwise, I would say that Muslims are failing. And I'm not interested in Muslims kind of doing jihad and holy wars and all those things. because the real test is in real life, ordinary attitude to other people and other Muslims, based on evidence, based on universal values. Universal values are very much corresponding with the values of Islam. And I share both, and I subscribe to both. And I don't find in the non-Muslim world, as well as in the Muslim so-called world, the actual adherence, real life adherence to these values. As I have said, in comparison with Muslims, some non-Muslims, especially among the Christians and Western communities, there is manifest evidence of looking after animals much better and on a much higher level as compared to the Muslims. But when inside the Western societies, the evidence is examined, then it is found that large numbers of so-called animal lovers are murdering and massacring and torturing large numbers of animals all the time. And when I say that, I include the majority of these so-called charitable organizations apparently dedicated to helping the animals. And those crimes are being committed in London, in East London as well. So I'll be talking about those item in due course. And until then, until the later editions, this is 20 past 9 GMT, which is the local time is 22:20 UK time on Saturday, the 5th of September, 2020.